Kale's heart raced slightly, unsure of her intentions. The proximity of such a powerful figure made him feel strangely exposed. He continued his work, pretending to focus on the repair, but his mind began to wander. She stood behind him now, only a few feet away. He could feel her presence, her eyes locked on him, watching every movement he made. He couldn't help but notice the strength in her posture, the quiet authority she exuded without saying a word. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. Kale swallowed, trying to steady his nerves. Lyra spoke again, her voice even quieter this time, almost a whisper. "Go on, human. Don't stop." Her words were soft but commanding, and they sent a strange shiver down Kale's spine. He paused, his fingers hovering over the armor, unsure if he had heard her correctly. He looked up at her, and for the first time since entering the room, he saw something in her eyes, a flicker of something different, something more personal, something that made Kale's pulse quicken. But he couldn't understand it. Why would she speak to him like that? What did she mean by those words? Kale forced himself to focus on the task at hand, his hands moving mechanically as he finished the last few adjustments to her chest armor. He could feel the weight of her gaze the entire time, and his hands shook ever so slightly. His mind raced with possibilities, each more confusing than the last. Lyra had never been anything other than a leader in his eyes, a figure of power and influence. Yet now, in this moment, her presence seemed to carry a new weight. When he finally finished, he straightened up, stepping back from the armor. Lyra's gaze never left him. "Is it done?" she asked, her voice low but with an edge of something almost playful. Kale nodded.
"All set. Your armor is fully functional now."
She didn't immediately move, just stood there, still watching him. There was something in her expression, something Kale couldn't quite place. He was used to being around leaders and commanders, but none of them had ever made him feel quite like this. He didn't know if it was her presence or the way she looked at him, but it made him feel as if he was suddenly standing on shaky ground. Lyra took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Kale instinctively took a step back, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. He was used to dealing with technology, not with powerful alien leaders who seemed to bend reality with a mere glance. "I don't know how you did it," she said softly, her voice almost reverent. "You fixed my armor with such precision. I've never met a human with such skill." Kale didn't know how to respond. He simply nodded, feeling a little awkward under the intensity of her praise. "It's my job," he said, trying to keep his voice even. Lyra studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. She seemed to be deep in thought, as if deciding something in her mind. Then, without warning, she stepped even closer, her presence overwhelming. "Tell me, human," she said, her voice almost a murmur. "What do you think of me?" Kale felt his heart race at her question. He wasn't sure how to answer. He had heard the stories about her, about how she ruled with an iron fist, how she commanded respect and fear in equal measure. But now, in this moment, standing so close to her, he didn't know what to think. "I think you're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You're not what I expected." Lyra's lips curled into the slightest of smiles, her eyes gleaming with something Kale couldn't quite interpret. "And what did you expect?" she asked. Kale hesitated. He didn't know how to explain it. The rumors had painted her as a ruthless and calculating leader. The stories had made her sound cold and unapproachable. But standing here now, so close to her, he saw something else. A complexity he hadn't anticipated. There was a depth to her, a quiet strength that was both intimidating and strangely captivating. "I expected someone different," Kale finally said. "Someone colder." Lyra didn't speak for a long moment, just staring at him with that same unreadable expression. Kale felt as though he was being weighed, measured, as if she was deciding whether or not to trust him with something. After what felt like an eternity, She nodded slightly.
I am many things, human, she said softly, and not all of them are what you might expect.
Cale stood there, unsure of what to say next. There was a strange tension in the air, a connection he couldn't explain. The silence stretched between them, heavy and thick, as they simply stood there, locked in this moment of unspoken understanding. Finally, Lyra turned away, her armor clicking as it locked into place. "Thank you for your work, Cale," she said, her tone returning to its usual commanding nature.
"You've done well,"
Cale nodded, still unsure of the whole situation.
"It was my pleasure, Princess."
Lyra glanced back at him over her shoulder. "We'll see each other again soon," she said, her voice almost a promise. "And next time, I'll have more than just armor for you to fix." Cale wasn't sure if she was joking or if there was more to her words. Then she led on. But as she left the room, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, this strange, unexpected meeting, was only the beginning of something much more complicated. The following day, Cale found himself once again in the heart of the alien warship. This time, however, the task was more urgent. The repair work had been simple yesterday, but today, the stakes were much higher. He had been summoned by Princess Lyra to ensure her armor was ready for the upcoming battle. The tension in the air was palpable as Cale made his way through the ship's halls. The walls were lined with alien technology that hummed softly, a reminder that this ship was a fortress. As he reached her chambers, he hesitated for a moment before knocking lightly on the door. He had been here before, but this time felt different. The brief interaction with Lyra yesterday had lingered in his mind, leaving him with a sense of unease. He couldn't quite explain it, but there was something about her that both intrigued and intimidated him. When the door opened, Lyra stood before him, her presence as commanding as ever. Her dark eyes studied him, and Cale couldn't help but feel as if she was reading him like an open book. She didn't say a word at first, simply stepping aside to allow him entry. "Come in, human," she said quietly, her voice as smooth as it had been the day before. There was no hint of the power she usually carried in her tone, just a soft command that Cale couldn't resist following. Once inside, Cale immediately set to work, preparing the tools he would need. The armor had already been partially dismantled from the previous day's repairs, but now the damage was more severe. The energy shield that protected her chest had suffered a malfunction, and if it wasn't fixed before the battle, Lyra would be vulnerable. As Cale worked, he could feel Lyra's gaze on him once again. She stood near the window, her arms crossed in thought. The silence between them was heavy, and Cale tried to focus on the task in front of him, to block out the discomfort he felt under her watchful eyes. It wasn't that he didn't respect her. He did. He admired her strength and leadership, but there was something more to her that he couldn't quite place. Finally, Lyra broke the silence, her voice drawing his attention. "Do you ever wonder, Cale, what it means to be a leader?" she asked, her tone thoughtful. Cale glanced up from his work, meeting her eyes briefly before returning to his repairs.
"I've never been a leader," he replied simply, "but I imagine it's difficult."
Lyra's lips curled into a slight smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "It's more than just difficult. It's a burden," she said, her voice distant. "When you hold the power to make decisions that affect the lives of so many, you begin to question everything. Every choice feels like it could tip the balance between life and death. Even the smallest decision can change the course of the future." Cale nodded, his hands still moving expertly as he worked on the armor. He wasn't sure what Lyra was trying to convey, but there was a heaviness to her words that made him pause. She was right. Leadership wasn't just about commanding others. It was about the weight of responsibility. For a moment, Cattle wondered what it must be like for Lyra to carry such a burden. She was the leader of an entire faction, someone who made life-or-death decisions daily. He couldn't imagine what that would do to a person, how it might change them. "I don't think I could handle it," Cal admitted, breaking the silence. "The responsibility, I mean." Lyra turned toward him, her eyes narrowing slightly as if studying him. "You might surprise yourself," she said softly. "Sometimes the best leaders are those who never seek power. They are the ones who understand the value of every life." Kael looked up at her, sensing that she was speaking from experience. There was more to Lyra than he had first realized, more depth to her than just a leader. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn to her, as if her words were revealing a side of her that few ever saw. Just as Kael finished repairing the final section of her armor, Lyra stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the now fully restored piece. The chest plate shimmered with a sleek, dark sheen, looking as deadly and elegant as ever. "Thank you, Kael," she said quietly, her voice lacking the usual authority. It was almost grateful? He couldn't be sure, but it was a shift from the usual commanding tone she used. "You're welcome, Princess," Kael replied, stepping back to admire his work. He wiped his hands on a cloth, his mind still reeling from their conversation. There was something more between them now, something unspoken. Kael couldn't quite put his finger on it, but it was there, hanging in the air like a charged current. Lyra turned away from him, walking back to the window. "You've earned my respect, Kael," she said, her voice softer now. "Not many humans have the skill or the patience to work with our technology, and fewer still could handle the pressure of being in my presence." Kael hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't used to being praised, especially not by someone as powerful as Lyra. He had always kept to himself, doing his job without expecting anything in return. But something about Lyra made him feel different. "I just do what I'm told," Kael said modestly. "I'm just an engineer." Lyra turned to face him again, her expression unreadable. "You're more than that, Kael. You've proven yourself more than once, and your loyalty doesn't go unnoticed." Kael blinked, unsure of what she meant. Loyalty? He'd never been particularly loyal to any cause other than his own survival and the work he did. But now, with Lyra standing before him, he couldn't deny that he felt a pull, a connection he hadn't anticipated. Before he could respond, the door to the room opened, and one of Lyra's advisors entered. The moment was broken, and Kael immediately returned to his usual professional demeanor. "Princess Lyra," the advisor said, bowing respectfully, "the fleet is ready. We leave in 1 hour." Lyra nodded, her expression returning to its usual stoic form. "Thank you, Kael. You're dismissed for now. I'll need you again soon." Kael bowed his head respectfully, his heart still racing from their earlier exchange. He wasn't sure what had changed between them, but he knew that this mission, this encounter, would be the beginning of something much more complicated than he had ever imagined. As he left the room, Kael couldn't help but wonder what the future held for him, and for Princess Lyra. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and he was no fool. He knew that alliances were fleeting, and trust was a luxury few could afford. But something about Lyra felt different. She wasn't like the others. There was something about her that made Kael question everything he thought he knew about power, leadership, and even loyalty. Perhaps, just perhaps, he might find a purpose here, far beyond fixing armor and maintaining machines. The following days aboard the warship were filled with anticipation. Kael had been working non-stop, ensuring that all of the ship's equipment was ready for the upcoming battle. The energy in the air was thick with preparation, but it wasn't just the equipment that felt charged. The interactions between him and Princess Lyra had become more frequent, more intense. Each time he worked on her armor, each time their eyes met, Kael couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. But Kael didn't know what to make of it. He was just an engineer, a human who had been hired for a job. Lyra was a princess, a powerful leader whose every move could change the course of a war. She had her own empire, her own soldiers, and Kale was nothing more than an outsider in her world. Still, there was a connection between them that neither could ignore. Today, Kale was called to the command center of the warship. It was a sleek, high-tech room filled with holographic displays, star maps, and a large table at the center. Lyra was already there, standing near the table, her back straight and her face set with determination. The moment Kale entered the room, her sharp gaze fell on him. "Kyle," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of something deeper, something Kale couldn't quite place. "I need your help with something." He nodded, walking over to where she stood. "What is it, Princess?" "I need you to come with me," she said.
"There's a mission. We'll need to infiltrate a rival faction stronghold."
"I need someone who understands the ship's tech, someone I can trust." Kyle's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected to be included in such a high-risk operation. "Are you sure you need me for something like this?" he asked, his voice uncertain. "I'm just an engineer." Lyra's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "I trust you more than you know, Kale. You've proven yourself more than capable, and your skills will be essential to the mission. There are no others I'd rather have by my side." Her words sent a rush of pride through Kale, though a part of him remained apprehensive. This was no ordinary mission. This was life or death, but there was something in her eyes, a spark of confidence, and perhaps even respect, that made Kale feel like this was more than just a job. This was his chance to prove himself, to her, and to himself. Together, they made their way to the warship's hangar. The ship was already preparing for departure, and the air was alive with the sound of soldiers readying their equipment. Kale couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he observed the scale of the operation. This was no ordinary battle. This was the heart of an empire, and Lyra was its unyielding force. She was a queen, a ruler, but in this moment, she was something else. She was a leader with a plan, and Kale had become an integral part of it. As they boarded a small shuttle to make the journey to the rival faction's base, Lyra sat beside him, her posture as commanding as ever. The silence between them was heavy, but it was different from before. There was no tension, no uncertainty. It was as if they both knew their roles in this mission, and neither of them was questioning the other. They were allies, partners in a dangerous game. The shuttle soared through the cold expanse of space, and Kale couldn't help but steal glances at Lyra. Her gaze was fixed on the stars outside the window, her mind clearly focused on the task at hand. Yet there was something vulnerable in her expression, something that made Kale wonder if she, too, had doubts about the upcoming mission. "Do you ever fear failure?" Kale asked quietly, breaking the silence. Lyra turned to him, her eyes meeting his. For a moment, the sharpness in her gaze softened. "Every day," she admitted. "But I've learned to live with it. The fear keeps me sharp, keeps me focused. It reminds me that nothing is certain in this world. Not power, not control, not even loyalty. It all depends on how we act in the face of that fear." Kale absorbed her words, feeling the weight of them settle in his chest. He had always thought of fear as something to be avoided, something that made him weaker. But Lyra had made him see it differently. Fear wasn't a weakness. It was a tool, a force that could sharpen the mind and prepare the body for what lay ahead. The shuttle soon arrived at their destination, a heavily guarded facility on a distant moon. The base was a fortress, with high walls and security systems designed to keep out intruders, but Kale had been brought here for one reason: to disable those systems. The rival faction was strong, but they had made a mistake. They had underestimated the human engineer who had fixed their enemy's armor. Lyra led the way through the shadows, her movements fluid and precise. Kale followed closely behind, keeping his head down and his eyes sharp. They moved through the corridors of the base, evading guards and security cameras as they made their way to the central control room. It wasn't easy, but Cattle was no stranger to working under pressure. When they reached the control room, Lyra's presence was immediately felt. She stepped forward, her voice cold and commanding as she issued orders to her team.
"Get the systems offline," she said. "We're not here to fight a battle. We're here to win the war." Kale set to work, his hands moving quickly over the control panels as he disabled the security systems.
His heart raced as the countdown began, each second ticking by with increasing intensity. The tension in the room was palpable, but Kale kept his focus. This was his moment to prove himself, not just as an engineer, but as someone who could rise to the occasion, someone who could stand beside Lyra when the stakes were highest. As the final system shut down, the base was plunged into darkness. The moment of victory was brief, but it was enough. Lyra turned to Kale, her eyes gleaming with approval.
"Well done, Kale," she said softly. "You've proven yourself once again."
Kale's chest swelled with pride, but it was quickly replaced with a sense of unease. He had done his job, but what now? What came next for him? For Lyra? They had succeeded in their mission, but the war was far from over. There would be more battles, more challenges ahead. And yet as he looked at Lyra standing tall and unyielding before him, Kale couldn't help but feel that there was more to this partnership than just the mission. He had become more than just an engineer. He had become a trusted ally, someone Lyra relied on. And in that moment, Cattle realized that he might be ready for more than just fixing armor. Perhaps he was ready to fight for something bigger than himself.